This is Brad A. Milford with the Unlimited Business Wisdom Podcast, where leaders, seasoned entrepreneurs, and business owners share their wisdom. It's straight to the point to respect people's time, and because we know knowledge and wisdom turn to business possibility, and possibility mixed with support and action become reality. In this podcast, we discuss leadership, sales, marketing, operations, team development, quality, and finance to drive sustainable results and everlasting impact to make the world a better place. Thanks for joining us. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Brad, thank you so much for having me here today.
It's a pleasure to have you. I've looked at all your information and I'm fascinated with the due diligence that I did and what I see, but I'm fascinated to hear from you. Would you be willing to just share briefly who you are and what you do for the audience?
Sure. So my name is Jess Podgajny. Sometimes I go by Jessica. Most of the time it's my parents that call me that though, Brad. So you
Got
got
it.
me, I was like nervous there for a second, but mostly it's Jess Podgajny. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a B2B SaaS technology company called Luna. And I'm also a mom. I'm also a podcast host, and I consider myself a future of work enthusiast. In fact, I am on a mission to personalize it. So I'm all about personalizing the future of work in my personal mission as well as my professional mission. They've come together in this company called Luna. And what Luna's all about is making it easy for teams and organizations to be more human, really empower people with their own individualized preferences at work. And, recently we've started to almost refer to our tech and system as a team operating system, so a
Mm.
TOS, where you have individual preferences from your employees in the form of these um, user manuals for people, almost like a guide, a how-to guide for every person on your team, and then the ability to understand in the aggregate what that means for how you should be working most effectively together. Our tagline is work designed for life. And the concept is like we all love working, right? But we also all love work. And we also all love life. So we have to find a way for those two things to work in harmony with one another, and our technology really shines a light on that conversation and helps to make it easy and fun for teams to engage in that way. So I'm happy to be here today talking to you about all the things.
I love it. Let's talk about all the things because this is a fascinating topic and it's very needed in the market. So I was
Thank you.
fascinated when I read the bio and looked at your website and all that kind of stuff because look, there's lots of talk. I mean, just from my exposure, right? We all have our experiences, and through my exposure and experience, I mean, I've been through like big corporate teams and, nonprofit teams and military teams, and I've had lots of exposure where some people do have multiple exposures and some people don't. Like some people work in a company, that's just where they work, and that's the only exposure they have. And so for those of us that have a wide variety of exposures, we have a lot to bring to a team, but not everybody is in that space. So I was really fascinated by what I saw on the website. And so I'm sure you're going to share some more. But do you have any just general thoughts before we
Well, I
dive
was just
in
going to
deep?
say that what's really interesting, so whether you've worked in one organization for your whole career or
Mhm.
you've, jumped around and worked at a number of different organizations, both experiences are wonderful.
Mhm.
And but I'll like when you think about the self-reflective side of that, I think maybe we could all probably acknowledge that over time, what you want and need from your employer changes because we're human. We
Agreed.
evolve, we have different hobbies, we have different priorities, we have different life circumstances. And all of those things mean that, maybe early on in our career, what we want is to, time off to travel, and we want the ping pong tables and we want the happy hours. And then, as things progress, we want more professional development or we need mentorship. And I think it's hard sometimes for people to speak up, especially if you've been in one company that whole
Mm,
time, to say, well, hey, like what I need now is a little bit different. And we're all about just making that sort of a seamless thing. Like you're regularly updating your profile so that your preferences are clear. And then you engage with your manager to have that dialogue so that you stay on the same page and employers can be meeting people where they are truly, and employees can feel really connected to their company as a result. So it's almost about like we change as people. It would be weird if we stayed the same forever. We're not robots, even though maybe some employers would like us to be. Um, but because we change and evolve, how do we keep our employer informed about that? And the last point I'll share there is like sometimes the things that we need from our employer change, but it's sort of transient. Like it's like, for like the next 6 months, I need to work fully remote, or
mhm.
I need to, maybe I want to compress my work week for a period of time, or maybe I just want to, next 6 months, I really want to prioritize my career upward trajectory and I want to focus on professional development, and then we sort of change back to certain things. So I think like recognizing someone shouldn't have to leave a company because they have a short-term need. So how do you retain those individuals? And you do that by creating the dialogue around it and having those conversations and making sure that it's part of the culture truly. And ultimately it leads to better retention, better engagement, employee happiness, and people wanting to stay with the organization longer.
I love that. I do have some other questions to ask, but I want to dive in just a little bit more if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Because
go
this
for it.
is this is powerful stuff. This is really desperately needed in the market. People need to hear these messages. I'm with you in this movement you're creating. I really am.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that.
Culture is so important, and I mean it's talked around, it's talked about. We know behaviors drive culture. I mean that's pretty simple stuff, right? It's pretty principle based, basic stuff. But how do we get this conversation going? That's really important within organizations. Is it top down? Is it bottom up? Is it in between? Do we have ambassadors all throughout the organization? Like all these conversations, and how do we start these depending on the size of the organization? How do we foster these conversations? This is really important stuff. So I love that you're here sharing about that. I'm curious, um, how flexible, so you've been doing this a while, how flexible are the organizations? I imagine if somebody's listening and they're watching and they're an employee, they have one perspective, and then the employer has a different a different perspective. So I'd really love to get your take on those different perspectives and how you're the bridge between those. Would you be willing to share?
Yes, of course. So, a couple things. We find that the companies that are interested in having conversations about our technology tend to be of a people first mindset or
Mm,
culture forward mindset. They're ones that recognize that things are evolving and will likely always evolve, and that they want to stay kind of on the front foot about
mm,
where things are going, be more progressive. Um, I have certainly had conversations with some more traditional organizations, just even in like friend to friend types of discussions. And there are absolutely companies that maybe aren't there yet, or and I'd like to think that they'll get there eventually, but that wouldn't necessarily be, yes, wouldn't necessarily be a fit today, but could come around at some point in the future. But so it's definitely, more progressive thinkers, definitely that people first profile that has an interest. And, there's really two ways that our customers can engage with our technology. One is by creating opportunities for explicit permission to the employees. Hey, you have these three choices around where you're going to work, or you have these three choices around these perks we want to offer. The other way is really more employee directed, and it's just saying, here's what I need to be at my best. This, profile of me. And it doesn't require any permission, but it just creates the conversation. It creates like this baseline, and really like open, transparent, safe space to have a dialogue about what do I need to work at my best right now, And then as a team, you can understand, wow, this is what I need, but it's really different than what Brad needs. And so I need to keep that in mind when I'm engaging with Brad. He tends to be a night owl. He's gonna work later. I'm a morning person. So we got to catch each other in that middle of the day time frame to make sure that's when we're collaborating, or whatever the scenario or circumstance might be. Maybe it's that I communicate more passively and you tend to communicate more directly. When I know that about my colleagues, all of a sudden my eyes are open to how I'm going to be most effective and most productive with the people that I'm working with. And so it's really just setting the stage for that to happen more organically, but in a way that's really approachable. And I think that's what's been missing, because like you said, companies are like, what should we do? Should it be top down? Should it be bottom up? Should it be? The answer is really both. It needs to be both,
Mm.
but we need structure around it and we need technologies to support it. And that's really where Luna comes into the mix.
Love that. I honestly couldn't love that more. This is a fascinating conversation. Again, one desperately needed. So I'm excited for you and this movement. It's
This
a
movement, the
movement, right?
world, Brad, the whole
That's
world. I
right.
mean,
That's what we're
let's take
doing.
on the globe here. Yes.
That's it. That's it. That's great. Jess, not Jessica, but Jess. But at least I didn't use
Yeah.
your middle name, because if I would have said your first name, your middle name, and your last name, then you would have
I
really thought
definitely
you
would
were
have
in
felt
trouble,
like I was
right?
grounded. I would be like, "Oh goodness. Oh goodness. Okay."
Jess, what's the best thing about being in business?
Oh my gosh. I am an entrepreneur at heart. I have always loved building, creating, really that vision around that. Like, what could this be?
Mm.
Asking those big blue sky questions, and I think that's the best. I think that's the best thing, being able to do that and then see it become a reality. It's hard work. Every day is hard work, but when you know, like, wow, I did that. My team and I did that. Like, we made that happen. We got all this great feedback from these employees, or these companies are so thrilled with their outcomes. That's the reward. So building and making a difference.
I love that. That's what can this be? And the sense of accomplishment and the impact. Like you said, we're changing the world. I love it.
Yeah, totally.
It's great. Um, I really appreciate you just being here and just being sharing, just sharing like openly. This is one of my favorite questions to ask. I'm a systems person. I imagine you have some of that too. I see a lot of visionary in you, but I imagine there's, having the the application that you have. I know you have to have some integrator as well. So
Yeah.
that from the system side, we hear from a lot of people, and even through the situation we've been in the last 2 years, like there's a lot of people who are scaling up really fast, really rapidly, and they're getting so many clients that the chaos that is created sometimes in that can cause some overwhelm. Would you be willing to share your thoughts with anybody listening and watching about that?
Yeah, so I absolutely have experienced the overwhelm when you're like, "Oh my goodness," like the floodgates, and it's a great problem to have at the end
Mm.
of the day. That's, you're like, "Okay, well, this is a good thing." Um, but at the same time, I always go back to the thinking of, like, measure twice, cut once.
Yes.
And right? So, I have found, if I pause and do a little bit of preparation and planning, then all of the subsequent steps become so much easier, instead of just, like, playing whack-a-mole, or sort of like firefighting, and then you get to a point where you're like, I've only been firefighting and everything is still chaos. So I know in my heart that it always pays off to pause and sort of measure twice, and then begin the execution process. Sometimes it's hard to do that because you're just like, you get caught up in whatever the
Mm.
moment is. So I'm human too, but um I think in those times of overwhelm, it's a deep breath, and it's like, okay, what are we going to do to what do we need to put in place to make this scalable, approachable, and something that we can execute with confidence that we're going to have a positive impact for customers, and not the downside, not the bad stuff.
I love it. I love it. Again, just going back to what you already said, like what can this be? Hey, we're in this right now, but what can this be? How do we do this? How do we push forward? So great stuff. I love it. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, sure.
So another fun question before we get to the crux, before we get to the, the real center of this. Um, who else that's successful like yourself, of course, ought to be on the Unlimited Wisdom podcast?
Yeah. So there's two other female founders that come to mind for me.
Love it.
Both happen to be in the consulting space, in management consulting mostly, or change management. Um, but one woman's name is Jennifer Ayers, and she runs she's the CEO of a company called 𝐭𝐚𝐫𝐞𝐝. And 𝐭𝐚𝐫𝐞𝐝 does a lot of work with large organizations focused on culture and change.
Hmm.
And she's just got a great approach. I think she's looking at bringing together the best of the best. And so sometimes it's full-time team members, sometimes it's finding the best, expert on a specific topic to bring into a project. And I think her approach is very modern in terms of, some people are gig and some people are full-time, and it all sort of evolves over time. So Jennifer Ayers at 𝐭𝐚𝐫𝐞𝐝. And then the second is Sarah Burlew at 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐫𝐿𝐵, and they are on a mission to make pot professional. And they do that through consulting with cannabis organizations.
Hmm.
And they have I think a healthcare consulting arm as well. So they do kind of health cannabis consulting, and it's just really fascinating. That space in and of itself is sort of exploding. And they are an excellent team that are really smart and trying to think about how to make pop professional, which is I think innovative in and of itself.
Indeed, it is. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's not something that I would normally like pursue, but I will reach out to them. I'd be fascinated to have a conversation. It is definitely a booming industry and a needed one as well. It's just not my space. So I love that. This is what diversity is all
It's not
about. I
my
love it.
space either, but I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating. Exactly.
Indeed. So
100%.
I love it. So I love that you brought up two different, totally different companies. So thank you. Looking forward to having them on. So if they're willing, it's great. Let's get to the center of this. Let's get to the crux of this. And so, what what advice, what wisdom would you share with other business owners, other people in the space who are now desperate for your
Oh
wisdom?
goodness. Um is it wisdom about building a business? Is it wisdom? What type of wisdom do you want from me?
Yeah, so I would definitely share. We're going to dive into what initiatives you're doing, that kind of stuff a little bit more. But what advice would you share with, let's see. So you've been in startup phase and
Mhm.
you work with more established businesses. So let's break it down a little bit. Like what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in business?
Yeah.
And then, because you're a serial entrepreneur, and then what piece of wisdom or what advice would you give to someone who's in a more established business and some of the problems that you see there?
Yeah. Great questions. So, um just starting out, I think the hardest thing to do there is to take the first step, to say, like,
Hmm.
I'm actually going to do this. And so, my advice there is to ask yourself two questions. The first one is, what's the worst that can happen? And is the worst that can happen like it doesn't work? Because that's not that bad. Then, like, you tried and and you move on to whatever's next. But ask yourself what's the worst that can happen, because usually we have these kind of big, worries conjured that, like, we can kind of squash by asking that question and peeling back on the answer a little bit. And
Indeed.
then the second question I recommend asking is, in your rocking chair, I call it the rocking chair test. In your rocking chair at the end of your days, what do you want to look back on your life and say? And do you want to be able to say, like, I tried that? I took the chance. I tried it. Maybe I failed. Maybe I succeeded. But, like, do you want that to be part of your story? And if you do, then just go for it. Again, what's the worst that can happen? So, those two things tied together can be I believe, really powerful in the starting out phases, and then hopefully it leads to all sorts of good places. I
Yeah.
think for established businesses, in terms of business wisdom, yeah, in an established business, it's easy to do things the same way, kind of continue on
Mhm.
with status quo. And as someone who is consistently thinking about, like, how can we do this better? How can we make this more efficient? How can we make this more human? How can we make this, just work better for everyone? I think keep reminding yourself, like, there's always room for improvement. There's, the technology advances, even just like the way that the world of work is changing in general. There's always opportunities to create those, even if it's something really small, like, take one step out of a process, and it might make someone's day like tremendously better that they don't have to do that one step every time that process
Indeed.
comes up. So I would just say, challenge yourself to think about how can things get better and not just consistently doing things the same way because that's the way they've always been done.
Love that. Very great advice on on both sides. So what's interesting when you said trouble getting started, definitely true with the business. I mean, it's, you know, even if it's a side gig, like how do I get to the tipping point? And there's all these fears and worries and doubts and all these kinds of things. Where like, we should just, you're never going to get there if you don't just get started and just go. Like you just got to do it. You got to have the courage to do it. So I love that.
Totally.
And I think that's also true. What's interesting is I was thinking about this also in the more seasoned established businesses as well. And that's what I was thinking about. And because I know you see this and I do too with the established businesses is with these teams, a lot of times what they're having trouble is getting started on some of these initiatives and some of these things they need to change in. And so you kind of touched into, with the what ran on the season side, what ran through my mind when you were sharing that is like because we've always done it that way.
Yeah,
Oh, the business killer, right?
it
And
is.
so
It totally
it's
is.
like, oh, but we've always done it that way. Right. And that's exactly why you need some new innovation.
A
So,
100%. Yes.
I love that. And the rocking chair thing is great. I love it. So I've heard that in several different ways, but it's really good to share that perspective and really think through that, backwards. Like if you're a project manager, you would work with the begin with the end in mind and work backwards. And why not do that in the business side of things too? So that's great. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to dive in because I know you have so many amazing things going on with your application, with your business. So would you be willing to just dive in a little bit deeper? So you told us what it is, a little bit about what it does. Like who are you serving? Not necessarily the company names, but like who are you serving really well right now? What's working for them? And can you just share a little bit more to illustrate what kinds of results you're delivering for the people?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are predominantly focused on the knowledge worker right
Mm.
now. So any companies that are employing knowledge workers. And I think that term has become pretty well known. But for anyone listening who maybe hasn't heard it, it's really, anyone who's trained in a specific skill that needs to be hired into an organization for that skill. So someone who has a knowledge and they become, so think of software engineers or management consultants or CPAs. Um, we see a lot of value for our particular platform in the knowledge worker setting. More specifically, we target tech companies, we target professional services organizations, and we also work in pharma and biotech. So there's, a lot of fierce competition in that space as well, and that talent is looking for ways to approach work in a more human way. So when we talk to the organizations in that space, they can range anywhere in size from a 50-person company to a 2,000-person company. So we are in the SMB market predominantly. We're sort of trending up to larger and larger organizations.
Nice.
Um, but they all have that people first mindset. They're all growing. They need to retain the talent on their team, and they need to attract new talent into the organization. And they know that there's ROI on culture, and they're just trying to figure out what it looks like, especially in this hybrid and remote kind of world. So we're working now, we're more distributed than we've ever been before. Many of these organizations have already been operating global teams, but it's even more distributed now because those global teams aren't working out of hub offices. They're all working from their homes. So how do you create that connection? How do you accelerate that speed to really knowing someone on your team when we're not working shoulder to shoulder anymore? How do you engage people to in that more human way to say, like, it's okay that you might have a different set of preferences than that person over there or that person over there. We're all unique and diverse. We have different work and life circumstances, and that's going to be what makes the team really vibrant and effective, frankly, at the end of the day. So those are the types of companies that we work with. Those are the types of goals that we have when we set out to work with any of them. We're looking to drive engagement, drive connection, drive retention. And we my favorite thing is when a comment comes through from an employee who's using our technology, and it's things like, I feel so empowered, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel I just started, but I feel like I know my team so well. Kind of this like idea of like, I wouldn't have learned those things about you if I didn't have access to this information via Luna's technology. So, and that's what we're going for. Like at the end of the day, we want to create that sense of belonging inside organizations because that drives ROI for companies. And that's what we're doing.
I love it. I love it. And so you've spoken into the employee side quite a bit, which is great. I mean, that's really the core. That's the core. We're in the people business, right? That's what it's all
Yeah.
about, right? It's the human side. And so you've illustrated that very well. However, I'd like to capture some like stats that you have on your website and things like that, because from the employer side,
Mhm.
I know, I mean, it's your business. I know too that when you retain, there's a lot of change in the world today. I mean, in the 70s, it was like it was frowned upon if you bounced from job to job to job. And if you had a gap in your resume or if you bounced a job, that was a bad thing. Now it's regular common practice. But I think we haven't, so there's like this some vacillation, like we've gone from this to that, but I think we're going to find a sweet spot somewhere where there's still some loyalty because there's some missing things in the market, right? And loyalty
Yeah.
tends to be one of them. It's because the cultures have not been what they could be, we'll say, in a friendly way. And
Yes.
so you're helping support that. And I know you're seeing lots of revenue dollars on the savings side from the company. So would you be willing to speak into some, like what retaining employees are and what's, some of those stats are? What are some of the results you're seeing on the employee side?
Yes, yes. So, the cost to lose one person on your team for a company is anywhere from 50% to 200% of that employee's salary.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it at that level, like if you can save one person from leaving your organization or extend the tenure of someone by 1 year, the value to your business is, we tend to use the 1x number. The 50% is probably a little low for today's
Yeah.
market. 200% is definitely relevant in some industries, but think of it as like 1x whatever that person's salary is. And so turnover is really expensive, as we know. And when we work with companies, usually our pitch is, hey, if we can save you from losing one person, three people, five people, what's that value to you? We can quantify it for you, and we can tell
Mhm.
you that your current turnover is 24%. And if we could lower that to 20%, what are those dollars for you? And it very quickly, again, depending on the size of the organization, can be in excess of $1 million. So it could be 1 million, 3 million, 5 million. All of a sudden, you're like, wow, that is not a line on my P&L, but it is absolutely real money for my
Nice.
organization. And that's what we speak about. So the greater you can engage your team and do that in a way where they, truly feel that belonging and connection. The stats out there, I think it's Gallup, highlights that companies with really well connected teams that know each other, that feel tethered to one another, have high trust, those teams have a 23% greater profitability than teams who are less connected. Or those
Yeah.
companies have a 23% greater profitability. And when you look at that, you're like 23%, like, oh, maybe that's not so big. If you had 23% more profitability in your organization, you would be doing cartwheels. Like that is a huge number. So this is about ROI for the employer, and that investment is your talent. This is about a new favorite term I have is ROL for employees, which is return on lifestyle. So
Nice.
employees want, to be recognized that they have both work and life happening, and employers want to make sure that they can be highly productive and have great output and meet goals and therefore be profitable. So we like to highlight that we're supporting both of those things.
I love it. It's a win-win, win-win-win
Win win
all
win.
across the board.
Oh yeah,
It's great.
you know it.
All wins. I love it. That was great. A very, very noble mission and well needed. So thank you so much for speaking into that. Look, I ask everybody, and you mentioned it earlier, and I always fear that I'm going to get it backwards. So I'm going to pause for just a moment. So we work to live, not live to work.
Yeah, you got it. I
I'm
messed
always
it up
afraid of getting
before,
that
but
wrong, right?
I know.
It's so easy to do.
It is.
Anyhow, we do work to live and not live to work. And that's what it's all about. It's the human side of things, right? So I'd love to know, what's the most fun vacation you've ever had? Because I know we can talk business all day.
Oh, we totally could. But I could also talk vacations all day because
Nice.
I love vacations and I love traveling. My most fun vacation, I'm gonna have to go with, I went with some friends to, my husband will be annoyed that I'm not picking a vacation that I went on with him, but
He'll be all
I
right.
went with
He'll be
I
all
went
right.
with friends to this little island chain off the coast of Sicily, like,
Mm,
southern Italy, and they're called the Aeolian Islands. There's probably 6 or 7 islands. Um, and each one has like their own unique personality, which of course I like. I'm all about personalization and everyone's unique special strengths. And so what you do when you go there is you get on a sailboat, a big old sailboat, and you sail around and you visit a different island each day, kind of explore, eat amazing Italian food, great Italian wine. You kind of take in the sights, and you're so disconnected. You feel like you couldn't be further away from, cell phones and technology. It's just like it's a digital detox for sure. And it was an incredible experience, incredible vacation. And it's a haul to get there, especially if you're coming from the States, but it's highly worth it. And um just really like beautiful overall. So that'll be my favorite one.
I love it. So you just touched my heart, actually, because I spent a year and a half in Catania, and I actually went to those islands. Not all of them. You went to more than I did, but I went to
No
Ireland. And
way.
what's really cool is I just shared this with a friend of mine. I just couldn't pass just sharing, just, I
Tell
just
me.
share this. So all since that point, this was years ago, and since that point, there's something about the environment of what an olive tree does to me, and I have no idea what this is all about. But I one of the people that lived there allowed me to just go on their property, and I could read books like under the olive trees and what there. It's not like smelling olives in the grocery store. It's totally different. The
Yeah.
smell of an olive
Ugh.
tree is completely. I mean, I can't even describe it. There's a certain experience, and it was so calming for me. And it's sometimes I'll wake up from dreams in the middle of the night, and just with this experience, this smell, this calm, this sense of calm
Oh,
that it gives me,
wow.
it's really wild. But I've never spoken to anybody that's actually been there
Been
and
there.
have
Yeah,
an
I flew
experience like
into
yours.
Catania and then
It's awesome.
yeah, made my way over to Lipari and yes,
It's
and then
amazing.
got my boat there and sailed all the way around. Yeah, it is such a
That's
special
amazing.
place.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, both work and with the vacation and a little bit about life. We really appreciate that. When somebody watches this and they listen to it and they're like, oh my goodness, I need to reach out to, and they'll call you Jess, not Jessica.
It's
I
okay.
need to reach out to Jess. What's the best way for them to do that?
So I always love when people connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't be shy. Find me on LinkedIn and invite me to connect. I'd love to know you. And you can also check out our website. It's helloluna.com, double L, double L. Additionally, you can always find us on the social media channels. So you can find Luna on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram. We're sort of in all the places, and our handle is Luna Life. So double LUNA LIFE. And yeah, would love to engage with anyone who's listening.
I love that. And if you're driving and you're listening to this, and so the link will be down below, but you said double L, so it's HELLOLLUNA.com, correct?
You got it. You got it.
That's
Yes.
awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Jess, for being on. I know that you have a rigorous schedule and you're super busy, but you carved out a piece of your day to be able to share here with the audience and the listeners. So I celebrate you for that. Thank you for creating such a great impact for people.
Thanks, Brad. It was a pleasure.
This is Brad A. Milford with the Unlimited Business Wisdom Podcast, where leaders, seasoned entrepreneurs, and business owners share their wisdom. If you're looking for more on leadership, sales, marketing, or operations to drive team development, higher quality, and high-level sustainable profits, we encourage you to join the Built for Brilliance community on Facebook or reach out to us about one of our mastermind groups, coaching or consulting, or even fractional COO services. You can reach us at buildbrilliance.net/contact. We thank you for listening, for sharing the show, and appreciate your rating and reviews, as this makes more shows possible. Thanks for joining us.